Catherine mentioned in her comments, the committee was charged with the examination of the status, role, and needs of the ET educational community. In order to fulfill that charge, we commissioned a study of a review of the available data, which you've just heard a snapshot of from Daniel. We conducted a survey of ET employers and a survey of ET educators. We held an informational workshop in Washington, and of course we conducted a literature survey. What I'm going to do in the next 10 minutes is tell you what we learned in 2 years in terms of findings and recommendations. I'm not going to read all of these in detail. I'm going to give you an abridged version of this, but I will mention we're going to look in several different areas in going through this exercise. First of all, we're going to look at trends in terms of the nature of ET education. We'll then look at supply and demand very quickly, given Daniel's comments. We'll look at educational and employment pathways, and we'll look at data collection, which is a serious concern. So let's talk about the first of these, the nature of engineering technology education. One of our findings was that this project and others have shown that, as a practical matter, engineering technology remains a relatively hidden and misunderstood component of the engineering world, especially in comparison to the engineering disciplines. So our recommendation is that there needs to be meaningful discussion among ET educators and engineering educators to put in perspective where these two fields complement one another and where they do not. This is not only in the interest of trying to deal with a diverse population of students, but it's also in the interest of the nation's employers. We need to make sure that the job descriptions and job requirements that are typical today and those that will emerge in the future are going to be met. So that's our first recommendation. There ought to be meaningful discussions among ET educators and engineering educators to deal with this kind of issue. And I might just point out that these kinds of conversations occur very rarely. Some universities have colleges of engineering and colleges of engineering technology, but not very many. And I'm not sure how often, even in those instances, conversations occur. But we do think they're important, and we do encourage that kind of dialogue. Continuing with this discussion of the nature of engineering technology education, we find that the distinction which has been made between four-year engineering and four-year engineering technology programs emphasize one major distinction, and that is that in engineering, the curricular emphasis is more focused on science and math, and in engineering technology, it's more focused on applied experience, on implementation. Those are complementary. They're not meant to distinguish the character in any other way. They're complementary. So and that's one finding. The second finding is that engineering technology education, it's not only underappreciated, but it's perhaps poorly understood, but it's a very important component of the U.S. educational system. It is a part of our technological infrastructure, and we need to make sure that it's recognized as such. So given these two findings, we have a recommendation, and that is that we need to, first of all, take it as being recognized and as a given that the jobs performed by ET technicians and technologists are fundamental to our technological infrastructure. That's an important point. They're fundamental. And then we need to make sure that recognizing that ET education is derivative, at least in part, of engineering education, that there are conversations in which the sort of distinctions and differences that appear can be discussed and ironed out. Once again, we recommend that conversations occur among engineering educators, engineering technology educators, folks who are interested in employing these people, and in fact, this might be done under the auspices of organizations like the Engineering Dean's Council and the Engineering Technology Council of ASEE. I think those two organizations should meet, and they should talk about these things. And the committee is of the opinion that that would be a useful dialogue. Daniel has spoken about supply and demand. I think the most important point to make here is that in terms of our surveys, there does not appear to be a shortage or an excess of supply of engineering technology folks. But I need to emphasize that this may be complicated by the fact that there may be geographic imbalances in terms of the supply and demand experience. And secondly, we need to take into account the fact that as engineering systems evolve, as new systems appear, as new technologies lead to new engineering enterprise, we need to make sure that there is some conversation around making a point of making educational experiences available to people who will populate those new industries. And so in order for the US to compete in the marketplace, in the global marketplace, that the coincidence of new skills and new educational experiences is one of those important characteristics. Let's turn now to educational pathways and educational and employment pathways. Compared to engineering technology education programs, particularly at the two-year level, appear to be more attractive to older students and to students who are currently underrepresented in STEM fields, and less appeal in a global sense to women. We think it's important to understand these demographics. It may be that they're a function of factors such as salaries and socioeconomic issues. It may be that many of these factors are driven by the retraining of an older population to access newer job experiences, newer opportunities. Whatever the reason, we believe that it's important, and the recommendation that we have listed here is that we need to conduct research, basically, to understand these demographics and to respond to them. That's the third of our recommendations. In terms of educational pathways, a couple of findings. First of all, the connection between ET education and the workforce is a weak one. We find that there are people who have ET degrees who work in a broad range of occupations. Many of the folks who have received four-year ET degrees work as engineers. Many work as managers. And conversely, we also find that many of those who are employed as engineering technologists have diverse degree backgrounds themselves. Many folks who are characterized as technologists have degrees in engineering. Some of them have degrees in other fields as well. And a very small fraction, interestingly, a smaller fraction of the folks who are employed as engineering technologists actually have degrees in engineering technology. There are more people who have four-year degrees in engineering, according to our study, our survey. There are more people who have degrees in engineering employed as engineering technologists than there are ET degree holders at the four-year level. That's an interesting twist, but it seems to be accurate. Secondly, there is a salary differential. The average salary of technicians and technologists, two-year and four-year ET degree holders, is actually very small, and far smaller than it is in comparison to folks who have four-year degrees in engineering. We think I think, and I'll just make a personal comment, I think that it's important, if we're willing to make the comment as a nation that engineering technology is fundamental to the engineering enterprise and to our competitiveness, then I personally, my personal comment, not a committee comment, I think we need to find a way to rationalize their salaries and the wage growth that is a problem. So this is another recommendation, leads to another recommendation, which I'll flash up here. Recommendation number 4, research is needed to better understand the reasons for the apparent loose coupling of degree attainment and employment in engineering technology. We really need to figure out exactly why this is the case. Obviously, there is a salary differential. Wage growth for engineering technologists has been slower than it has been for engineers. We need to rationalize that, I think, and perhaps consider ways of responding to those characteristics. Finally, data collection. Daniel mentioned in his presentation of the analysis of employment and educational experiences that both, well, I'll put it a little differently. What I wanted to say is there are anomalies in the data that's collected. And some of these anomalies, most of them seem to have their origin in the classification systems that are used to identify both educational attainment and employment experience. For example, finding number 5A. CIP is the classification of instructional programs. It's an organization that codes the database that identifies engineers, engineering technologists, and so on. It's interesting to find that in the CIT designation, engineering technology does not appear in some of the descriptions of the degree holders who are identified with ET. For example, nanotechnology appears as one of those fields. It doesn't have the language engineering technologies. For example, mechanical engineering technology doesn't appear in nanotechnology, yet it is included in the database of ET, according to the CIP. It's not to say these are not important. These are both important areas, but that makes the collection of data and the interpretation of data very difficult, almost impossible. And the same is true in terms of employment choices. There is an equivalent organization called the System of Occupational Classification, SOC. They do the same sort of coding for employment choices. In the SOC code, there is no distinction between technicians and technologists. Yet we know there are such experiences in terms of the graduates of ET programs. We think there ought to be a way of separating those. And we've separated them, as Daniel mentioned, according to their degree attainment, either 2-year or 4-year experiences. But this is part of the reason why the database that Daniel mentioned is difficult. There are anomalies of this kind. They could be corrected. If there's a will to correct them, they can be corrected. Here's the next recommendation, the final recommendation. We think that, given these anomalies, that there should be a more comprehensive survey of data on individuals participating in the post-secondary education experiences related to ET. Why is this important? Again, I'll give my own personal opinion here. This is important because we want to understand what is the production rate of the skills and talents of people who leave our schools with ET degrees. We want to understand the stock of available folks in different jobs that would respond to different job opportunities. And I think going forward, we want to make sure that we have a system that is capable of identifying those who are ready to take on new jobs in newly evolving engineering enterprise. The database right now, I don't think will allow us to do that. So the recommendation is we need a more comprehensive survey system in order to handle the anomalies that appear today, both in terms of educational attainment and in terms of employment choices. All right, that's it. That's 2 years and 10 minutes. Thank you.